Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Colleen Syak, and I'm happy to host today's webinar. We'll be covering the 5 essentials of imaging workflow in an era of pandemic. Today's session will be recorded, and everyone who is in attendance will receive a copy of the recording. All participants are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, please use the question chat function, and we will be answering questions at the end of today's presentation. I now have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers. First is Mike Talich, who currently is EVP of Sales and Strategic Planning for Mavro Imaging. Mike has spent over 20 years of his career in the payments industry, with the last 6 at Mavro. Mike has several notable achievements, including the design of the United States' first accounts receivable conversion, better known as ARC program, for ACH. He also holds an innovative patent on mobile receivable payments. Welcome, Mike. Also joining us today is Mark Messier, who's currently a product specialist with OPEX Corporation. Mark spent the first 25 years of his career at Scan Optics before coming to OPEX. During his time at OPEX, Mark has had a variety of roles, such as pre-sales analyst, sales support, and installation support. The experience in these roles has helped Mark understand and better educate customers on solving their toughest scanning challenges. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Finally, we have Frank DiMatteo with us today. Frank DiMatteo has been with Consolidate Edison Company, better known as Con Ed of New York, for the past 45 years. During that time, he's held numerous project and leadership positions within the company. He's currently the Director of Treasury Operations, which oversees lockbox operations and day-to-day cash management needs for Con Edison Incorporated and its subsidiaries. Frank also has CEI, stock transfer operation. His recent accomplishments include the implementation of a new Treasury workstation and redesign and upgrade of Con Edison's in-house lockbox operation. Prior to joining Con Ed's Treasury Department, Frank has held various positions such as Assistant Controller and Director of Financial Systems Development. Welcome, gentlemen. With that, I am turning this over to Mike Talich.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike Talich, and thank you for joining us today. I look forward to an informative presentation with a great group of experts. To quickly highlight what we're covering in this presentation, we have the following agenda topics. First of all, Mark Messier will lead us through the current challenges faced in the industry and how getting back to work is still an ongoing obstacle. I will then transition the presentation to Frank, who's going to discuss how Con Ed was able to prepare for these challenges and the impact to his overall organization. We'll then transition the topics away from Con Ed's specific results to your key takeaways. Mark and I will cover the 5 essentials that Con Ed has identified with OPEX and Mavro's assistance. And along with the 5 essentials, we're going to actually pose a question to you, as well as answering questions at the end, as Colleen indicated. Look forward to getting into the presentation, and now we're going to turn it over to Mark to begin with the current challenges.
Thanks, Mike. This is Mark Messier. As you heard, I'm a scanning product specialist with OPEX Corporation. The question here is, what is the new normal? It's sort of a challenge that we've seen come up recently. So that the situation we have ourselves in is not new. It's come up every time a new disruptive business challenge has presented itself. We've had natural disasters, wars, regulatory mandates, even new societal norms. They've each had an impact on what we consider normal. Now, this one has a global scale that has rarely been seen. But as in each prior case, the real issues that we find are simply, this has happened. What does it mean today, and what can we control as we move toward tomorrow? Well, one of the things you're going to see happen here, and probably you've already experienced it in some of your places, is we're going to have to deal with a reduced in-office staff. Workers are either not going to want to or may be required by state or local directives not to come into a centralized office environment. We're going to see that there are new worker safety initiatives that we'll have to bring into our workplace. Distancing, cleaning, monitoring practices, all will have to be established for those that do come in. And we're going to have more remote employees to deal with. And that will require new and different policies and practices, and that will require different granular planning. We can't think annually as much as we have in the past. We're going to have to think in smaller bites. Now, additionally, this event has shown that business continuity planning is not optional. It's not theoretical anymore. It's happened. We're going to have to figure out how in the future we can deal with such things, because this is not going to be the last time we have something that we have to continue our business in the face of. And then lastly, normal is going to be a moving target for some time to come. So maximum flexibility and resource planning is going to be essential. Now, how do we get back to work? Well, what changes can we undertake? What can we do to solve the dilemma in our industry, at least? And that dilemma is that the same amount of mail and paper payments, mortgages, forms and file boxes, they're going to come in. But we can't bring in the same amount of staff to process it safely, at least not without expanding the physical workspace to maintain safe social distancing and environmental safety practices. So how can we reduce the amount of staff needed to convert paper into usable images and data? And how then can we repurpose that staff into remote workers who can efficiently complete the data processing steps required from those images?
Thanks, Mark. Well, let's transition now from the industry overall challenges that we face to how Frank at Con Ed has faced this current pandemic. Just to set some context, we're going to start with a quick bit of history because how Frank came to his initial decision and the foresight gained through that process, that really set the stage for how Con Ed was going to be able to respond to the pandemic's challenges, as well as to some of the other environmental factors that Mark indicated. So the expectation for this section is we really want you to better understand how these best practice factors, in other words, these essentials that resulted from the initial decision for Frank became critical components for the future challenges that Con Ed faced. So with that, Frank, let's take us through Con Ed's experience.
Good morning, everyone. Con Edison, for those of you who may not know, is the New York City electric, gas, and steam utility. We service over 3.4 million utility customers. And right now at our remittance processing center, we process about 900,000 checks per month. In 2012, I was asked to take over a lockbox due to the difficulty that the company was experiencing processing customer payments, both on a timely and accurate basis. At that time, our operation consisted of 24 union, 4 management, operating on 2 shifts, and we were using J&B software with 2 OPEX 150s, 6 OPEX 51s, and 2 NCR transports. Today, we're operating with 11 union, 3 management, 1 shift, 2 OPEX 150s, 1 OPEX Falcon, 4 OPEX 51s retrofitted to 7200s, and we got rid of the NCR transports. We would be in failure mode during this COVID contingency if we were still faced with our legacy system challenges. And some of those key challenges were inefficient architecture consisting of 12 production servers, which required same upgrade to be manually installed to each server individually. Risk of improperly installing upgrades were very high. It happened a number of times, taking down production. Modifications were both risky and costly. Most modifications were developed in India and required multiple iterations before working properly. In some cases, the mods removed core functionality without us knowing about it. It was impossible to regression test the entire system on each modification. Workflow was extremely inefficient. We had to open, sort, stack on the OPEX 51s, and then run the same work on the transports for scanning, resulting in multiple document touches of the same documents. We were unable to create virtual batches, which made it necessary to walk around and follow the paper. In addition, our management team was constantly walking around on the floor to monitor productivity and address system idiosyncrasies. Decentralization of the workforce to address COVID would have been a challenge in our legacy environment. Next slide, please. With operating costs on a per unit of work basis significantly higher than the industry average, we had to consider outsourcing or radically changing our existing environment. We engaged in an industry expert to evaluate current operations and insist on or build outsource assessment. Our mandate was to find a cost-effective, best-in-class solution for both hardware and software. We gladly took advantage of an offer from OPEX to evaluate our operation and make recommendations. They immediately identified workflow issues that were addressed by making minor modifications to OPEX and J&B software. But more importantly, they provided a recommended hardware configuration which would significantly improve efficiencies and reduce costs. Of course, we thought they were just looking to sell equipment. After all, they recommended to get rid of the transports in favor of Falcons. We said thanks and showed them the door. No, I'm just kidding. The key message was that our software was holding us back. Mavro did the same for us as OPEX. Their executive team came in and evaluated our operation and provided a recommended operating framework. While still on site during the presentation, a Mavro team member made a few tweaks to our OPEX hardware process flows, which instantly demonstrated how we could leverage Mavro to address our batch processing issues. After reviewing the solutions in the marketplace, we selected Mavro because we felt that their software leveraged the one-touch scanning that OPEX provided. Mark and Mike will discuss one-touch scanning and processing in more detail a bit later during the presentation. Most importantly, they also provided us with their vision of how a best-in-class application should work, which convinced us that their business acumen was well thought out. We chose Mavro because of a modern architecture consisting of only 3 servers. Upgrades were compiled into one program which took care of all upgrading issues on the servers. There's a lot to be said for software made and supported in the United States. Mavro also supported remote access, which turned out to be vital in this pandemic. The user-friendly management dashboard provides data on key processes and productivity reporting on the performance of each member of the workforce. We saw an enormous future potential beyond lockbox check processing, and in summary, we found a partner who took great interest in our success. Let's go to Mark for the next slide.
Thanks, Frank. You've heard Frank describe a process change, and I thought it might be appropriate to describe the traditional process that's been the norm in scanning for a very long time. This is the process that I was involved in for 25 years in my former position, starting back in 1983. And it was the norm because there was no alternative at the time. And it's referred to as 3-step scanning. Traditional 3-step scanning is a very labor-intensive, inefficient process because the components of it, the 3 components, are out of balance. Numerous staff sit at desks or mail opening machines, and they open. And that open process is essentially open the envelope, remove the contents, and then look inside for left items. You might even put the empty envelopes on handling workspaces to look through them to see if there's anything from a light table. The next thing that happens, though, is one of the worst, in fact, is prep. That's the second step. More people, more touches. They sit at desks, they unfold pages, they remove staples, they take torn pages, they stamp receive dates on things, they copy small items. They have to walk over to a copying machine because the scanner can't deal with a small piece of paper. They have to order pages, insert separators, jog, stack, add batch headers. It just kind of goes on and on. And the thing about this step is that fundamentally it's not a value-added activity. What they're doing is satisfying the needs of the scanner or the downstream software rather than the needs of your company or your client. Your client really could care less if you pull a staple out of something or you don't. So this prep step is all non-value add. And then finally, at the end of all that, you get to do the scanning. And essentially, you load the stuff into the scanner, and you watch it go empty, and you repeat. It's just essentially a 3-step process. But the problem with it is that a typical worker can perform the first 2 steps at roughly 600 pages an hour. But a scanner that feeds at, say, 200 pages per minute is going to consume that hour of opening and prep labor in about 3 minutes. So you're going to need 20 workers to keep that scanner running for just 1 hour. And by the way, if you think that you could get a faster scanner, that will help. Well, the problem is you're simply exacerbating the problem. You're making that imbalance worse, and so you're going to have more prep labor to feed that new beast. So that's the problem with this 3-step process. Now, a one-touch process eliminates most of the steps required, and then it combines the rest. So what happens then is you have to open the envelope, remove the contents, perhaps unfold pages if they're tri-folded in the envelope. You're probably going to want to remove most staples. It's still not the best thing in the world to feed them through, but it doesn't hurt in some cases. And then you feed the pages. And then it's kind of like, well, shampoo. You rinse and repeat. Just continue to feed the pages, touching the paper one time. So what this one-touch process creates is a more lean, balanced approach. On the left side here, you see that the normal, traditional process requires a large, centralized, open and prep scanning staff at your facility. And in most cases, you have centralized post-scanning staff to do the work from the images and the data to perfect it and send it on downstream. Whereas a one-touch process is reduced staff, it's safer, and typically you can do it in about 50% with 50% less staff than you can the traditional way. With the goal being you can repurpose and distribute that post-scanning staff to free them up to do post-scanning activities in a remote location.
All right, thanks, Mark. Now that we know a little bit more about one-touch scanning, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about one-touch processing and what does that mean. As Frank described some of the challenges from his historical account of doing the traditional process to selecting this best practice, one-touch scanning and one-touch processing approach, and expanding beyond lockbox, those two concepts come together, but without understanding how they do that, that may take some time. So I just want to explain a little bit about what does that mean. And Mavro is the industry pioneer that's really brought this process together and really has taken the evolution of the one-touch scanning approach and changed that into a complete one-touch process overall. So let's get into the meat of it. What do I mean by one-touch processing? Well, one-touch processing does a couple things. And the first thing it does is it allows you not only to take advantage of a scanner for your paper-based channels, and that scanner could be the OPEX device, as Mark described. It could be a mobile capture. It could be a remote branch that's feeding information into the system. But in addition to those scan channels, you can also import transactions that are electronic based. So they could be an EDI or an ACH transaction, a wire transaction. They could be an electronic transaction coming through email or a fax. But lastly, it's not just those kinds of transaction-based channels. It could be other types of non-payment information as well. It can be correspondence that comes with transactions or not with transactions that include payments. It could be return mail. It could be forms or claims processing, accounts payable information. So when we think about one-touch processing, the important thing is to be able to bring all of your channels together into one automated input. And then the real magic sauce is once those channels come together, having a standardized workflow that allows you to efficiently apply your business rules. So again, you're not sorting paper or you're not making decisions as operators as to how work gets processed. You're letting the system manage that type of activity and make decisions as to what this transaction needs to do next. So the operator may provide input, but really we're looking to add validation. We're looking to smart batch these transactions as to where they need to go and utilize lots of different types of digital tools to make it the most efficient process possible without causing the legacy limitations of maybe your downstream receiving systems to dictate that the system can handle everything in an automated fashion. So again, don't rely on that traditional approach to handle transactions and separate paper or to separate types of work into point solutions. Bring them together with a consolidated solution. Touch the paper, touch the transactions once as they go through the workflow, and then allow the system to determine what needs to go where and how those outputs occur. Now, along with the transaction processing and being able to provide a one-touch workflow, as Frank mentioned, with some of his out-of-the-box requirements for a advanced solution that could handle remote servers and virtualization, you have to have that type of technology as you look to the future. So in a one-touch processing platform, you have to be able to support your IT staff by providing something that's going to give you that ability to deploy to a virtual server, deploy to a cloud environment. In addition, you want that solution to be able to be upgraded easily and possibly for free, such as Mavro does. And lastly, the IT requirements are really going to be driven by different types of security levels, different types of regulatory compliance. So you may need to deploy on servers that are CIS level 1 supported, or you may have to do different types of compliance for PCI, HIPAA, or state-level personally identifiable information challenges. One of the key components overall of this modern architecture is you must have encryption as part of that overall process. And we'd like to announce one thing on this call that's new. At Mavro and OPEX jointly have released a full end-to-end encryption application that is the first in the industry. So what that means is while the paper is actually going down the OPEX scanner, the Mavro encryption tool that has encrypted it previously once it was imported is now also encrypting that information on the scanner itself. And this is unique to Mavro's integration with OPEX. So the same 256-bit encryption package that we've deployed previously as part of our modern architecture, we're now able to extend into the scanning level. So the ability to have encryption as well as be compliant with all of these other IT resource requirements is really an essential piece of the overall puzzle. And, Frank, I think you can attest that as we go and manage different types of security audits, you really have to have the right platform to be able to achieve passing scores on your audits.
Well, as a regulated utility, Con Edison is faced with federal, state, local mandates to encrypt data, PPI, and other types of sensitive data. And I'm sure most of you that are on the call are facing the same issues. In addition, we have a state regulator that requires us to publish an annual review and document every year how we're protecting data, identify areas of weakness, and also identify changes that we've made. In many cases, we've had to accomplish this by bolting on data protection solutions to existing applications and databases, which has proven to be costly. And the key thing here is Mavro, along with OPEX, is addressing this out of the box. It's the best way to get rid of auditors when they come in and see that our system is on the fly encrypting the information. So I can't emphasize enough that encryption, integrated encryption, is a key requirement in selecting a software solution today.
Thanks, Frank. The last thing I wanted to mention about a one-touch processing platform is that with remote infrastructure, with remote scanning, with likely remote people in the new normal, you have to have a dashboard. So what you see on the screen are a couple examples of screens from Mavro's dashboard. The middle one shows a unique integration where not only is the Mavro workflow statistics and tracking of jobs included, but also a unique integration of OPEX's Insight product brings that level of information together into one easy-to-see dashboard. Additionally, you need to be proactively alerted. You can't do the management by walking around and see how the system is performing with your people. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a red error message. Having a proactive alert to avert workflow disruptions and monitor real-time activity across jobs, such as CAR/LAR or imports from email or scanners, or real-time work that operators are doing. Being able to handle and identify quickly when people are meeting SLAs or not, when people are meeting performance standards or not, is critical as you look at being able to manage through a dashboard versus having the ability to just walk up and say to somebody, what's going on here? Well, why are you not meeting this certain level? So that dashboard is really critical as we move forward.
And as I previously mentioned, Mavro's dashboard allowed us to successfully decentralize during the pandemic. And the way we did this is we split into two teams. One team working in-house at the lockbox, opening and scanning the payments, and the other team worked remotely accessing the Mavro software. And the dashboard allowed us to track all aspects of employees' performance, which virtually eliminated our legacy mindset that all lockbox processing had to be performed on site. Next slide, please. I just going to briefly cover some project results. And the first item is I want to emphasize that during my career at Con Edison, I spent a good deal of time running an IT application development team for all financial systems. So I'm no stranger to large system integrations. And I have to say that in many cases, you take these large implementations with some trepidation. The Mavro project stands out as one of the few implementations that came in on time and on budget. Anecdotally, on the night before going live, one of our test scripts uncovered a show-stopping error. Our specification design team omitted a key requirement from the spec document. So I immediately contacted Mavro's executive team, explained the urgency, and they worked over the weekend to reconfigure the system. It was a pretty major change. I thought it was going to cost a bundle to implement and redesign the system, but the executive team informed me that our implementation went so smoothly that it was under budget and there was no additional charges. And consequently, we went live on schedule. And when I say that Mavro is a true partner, I really mean it. In terms of project highlights, I just want to cover a few. It took us a while, but the team quickly realized that the speed of simply dropping envelope contents on the OPEX scanners without sorting or preparing was much more productive. Ironically, we gave away the NCR transports because the team began to complain that they were taking up space. That was a pretty hard sell, but it's amazing how we transitioned to that. Mavro supported intelligent routing of our bank deposits. At that time, we had 4 operating companies in 3 states, and many of our business customers operate in more than one of those service territories, and despite requirements to pay each company separately, these bookkeepers send us one check along with multiple coupons for different companies. But we have a legal requirement which prohibits us from commingling funds belonging to different companies. So we can't simply cut a check into separate bank deposits. Mavro determines the most logical company to deposit the check to and then creates a report for customer accounting to transfer the monies to the correct company. This resulted in a significant labor savings for customer service performing reconciliations. Mavro also developed an integrated ACH payment processing module. Customers can make ACH deposits directly into our bank account, and Mavro imports a notcher formatted file from our bank and processes the payment automatically as long as remittance data was provided as part of the record. If remittance detail is missing, customer service representatives access Mavro and input the missing data within the Mavro keying screens. In addition, we worked with Chase and Mavro to include within the image cash letter or reference number, which allowed us to automate the processing of 600 to 800 returned, as you might call them, bounce checks that we receive on a daily basis. Next slide, please. As a result of automating the return check process, we uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that was perpetrated by the department who was manually processing the returns onto the customer service system, and they're now in jail. We continue to receive high-quality support from both OPEX and Mavro, as we have had no outstanding issues since going live 4 years ago, which has resulted in 100% uptime. Minor issues, when they arise, are quickly resolved by the Mavro support team. Next slide, please. We knew that OPEX one-touch scanning and Mavro's software could do more than just lockbox processing. This was vital because with checks declining by 5 to 7% per year, our outsourcing of check processing would be an inevitable outcome. We expanded our service delivery model without having to purchase additional software from other solution providers. During the last 2 years, we have expanded this model, and here are some of the things that we managed to implement. We installed and integrated into Mavro remote deposit capture scanners so that we can scan large dollar checks received outside of the lockbox without having to route the checks to the processing center. This allows us to improve daily float and reduce borrowing costs. We also decentralized the corporate mailroom. All correspondence mail is now routed to the remittance processing center. We use OneTouch to open, drop, and scan the mail. We then leverage Mavro's archive and routing features to electronically route mail to the appropriate organization. Our mailroom was able to reduce manpower, and we did not add any additional staffing to our operation. In addition, we now scan accounts payable invoices and route them directly into our Oracle AP system, and this eliminated manual entry by the accounts payable group. Customer payment agreements, we now scan. These customers who have a hard time paying bills sign contracts, and we scan these contracts into Mavro. They're archived and they're accessible on an as-needed basis by customer service and our legal department for reference. In summary, because we implemented a best-in-class solution, we were well positioned to deal with the current COVID crisis. And I'm going to want to transition to Mike for the next slide.
All right, thanks, Frank. As we've gone through Con Ed's journey of how they made some initial decisions years ago to select a one-touch platform, and how that decision enabled them to be able to respond to pandemic and all sorts of other business issues. Not only was it a new remittance solution, but it's a platform that's been able to adapt to this pandemic and whatever comes next. So what we'd like to do next is just recap the 5 essentials that we believe were presented throughout this presentation, and how Con Ed successfully responded to the pandemic. So with that, Mark, let's start out with the first couple essentials.
Thanks, Mike. The first one is that you need to minimize the touches of paper and document circulation. You need to ask yourselves, how many times do you really want to touch the same piece of paper in your organization? How much cost and how much risk, both business and personal, could be eliminated if you could touch a piece, say, one time at the point of entry, and then stop it going from person to person and place to place throughout your organization? The second one is that you need to decentralize access to mailroom scanning. By doing that, by decentralizing the access, each department resource gets it individually separated and classified on their computer screen. The department is prevented any infection risk from having to interact with additional departments or resources to go to the mailroom. They've allowed the department to work remotely and be as much more productive as they were, and they're going to receive their work in a more timely fashion. Mike?
Thanks, Mark. You know, as we've gone along, Frank identified how he would split his team into two teams, and some are working remote, some are coming into the office to move the paper. The whole idea of incorporating home and remote workers for data entry on transactions is the new normal. So can your current platform be easily deployed and supported in a virtualized manner? Can you add additional keying stations, or is there a significant expense? Possibly your licenses are unlimited, but there's a cost that goes with that. And lastly, in order to support more touches from the outside world, what's the impact on your IT group? Do you need to have a significant upgrade every time Microsoft offers a patch? How is that going to change as your servers go from being located centrally for one operation to needing to be accessed from multiple locations? The next item, or the fourth item that we have out of the five, is the dashboard. And how do you know that your resources are being optimized and productive? Can you monitor them in real time? Are you being proactively warned? As Frank indicated, the requirement for using the dashboard became more and more apparent as the team was split up and performance could only be monitored through the system, no more management by walking around. So a dashboard is critical to measuring the production and reassuring your management that the capital they've invested has been invested wisely in both the people, the solutions, and infrastructure necessary to minimize centralization and respond to the pandemic's risk of being together. Finally, this essential goes without saying. Automation of processes is really what technology is all about, and driving away paper or legacy system limitations is critical. So let's touch the paper once. Let's do a one-touch scanning process, a one-touch processing solution. Eliminate those manual choke points or infection points potentially, bypassing paper or having to interact with other departments manually or in person. Let the system manage transactions and allocate digital items to downstream systems and processes. One other thing that I'd like to note about automating manual process is that it can't be automated in such a way that it's customized. And what I mean by that is you as the customer need to be able to take ownership and be able to do the changes and add additional processes self-sufficiently. Frank had several examples of how they expanded beyond lockbox to handle different types of payments or integrate different types of mailroom scanning. What wasn't mentioned was that the Con Ed resources actually were able to set those documents up on the OPEX scanner, set them up in the Mavro workflow themselves. And so in the middle of the pandemic, they were able to respond quickly to those needs without custom coding, without burdening IT, without trying to wait on a vendor to be able to get back to them based on available resources. That was something they were able to do themselves right away in the moment. So when you're evaluating your next response and your next business challenge upcoming, not only is automating a process a key component of it, understanding how you can self-solve and use that solution and solution support to your best ability is critical. So as I described the agenda and previously, one of the key items I mentioned was I was going to ask a question of you ahead of taking questions from the audience. So the question on the screen, I think, is critical to ask yourself. Are you ready? We're still in this pandemic. We have the risk of a second wave coming. We have a risk of future pandemics that we can't identify today, but we know for sure that it's here today that we have to be able to respond. It's not a theoretical exercise anymore for a pandemic. We have to mitigate the risk as an ongoing business process. So what has happened is a game changer. So each of you will be required to address where do you go forward from today? What kind of environment are you going to be utilizing to work in? And can you take the essentials that we identified here today to make that environment different? Each of you will have your own response and need assistance uniquely to your situation. We look forward to working with you. And on this next challenging chapter as the industry evolves. So with our question posed to you, let's go to answering your questions that we've collected throughout the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Actually, the first question is for you. I believe the question is, my work mix is not payment related. Would I receive the same benefits from this one-touch scanning approach?
All right, well, thank you for that question. That's a great point, is that I mentioned previously that, this solution, the one-touch processing approach, is not, restricted to only transactions that includes payments. It could be all sorts of other different items. And Mavro and OPEX together, we've implemented lots of different systems that handle non-payment solutions, with great results. So it's a little bit difficult to give you a clear answer on this one because, without understanding what that non-payment related transaction type is, we may have a solution that fits your needs great. It may be something that maybe isn't a fit, but we would have to define that and would look forward to working with you to collaborate on, what might be possible and how we can apply these 5 essentials to that solution. So, what processes can we automate? How do we allow for remote groups to access that information? How can we make it much more labor efficient and give you visibility? All of those kinds of topics, we'd love to collaborate with you to assess what might be possible.
Okay. The next question is, and this is still for you, Mike, can Mavro integrate with a secure network?
I'm sorry, Colleen, I had something with my headset. I didn't quite get that question.
Yeah, the question is, can Mavro integrate with a secure network?
Oh, absolutely. So out of the box encryption, Mavro supports TLS 1.2 network level encryption. So that is certainly something that is supported, right now and available for you as we move forward. If there are other types of encryption that you're looking for, we'd want to jump into those specifics. But as far as an industry standard, Mavro stands behind that type of integration for overall network security.
Okay, thank you. The next question is actually for Frank. We are trying to minimize workers at our facility. What is a reasonable number of employees that are still needed and to be in person? And what processing can realistically be done by home workers?
Well, to determine how many you need, I guess really is a product of what the inputs are. I can tell you that in our facility, we have, I think we're operating now with 10. We have a budget of 11 or 12. We're processing 900,000, approximately 900,000 checks, plus all the correspondence mail and the invoices and the customer receipts. And what we've done is we've taken our workforce and we've cut it in half. So the answer to the second part of the question is you need a certain number of people, obviously, to take in the mail, process the paper on the various pieces of equipment that you may have in your facility. But then what we realized, because we have a secure environment, we can have our employees access the keying components, the pieces that do not require a physical presence. So we split our workforce in half, and we haven't missed a beat. Plus, in some cases, we've actually increased what we're doing. During this event, customer operations came to us with the city of New York had an issue with sending us payments, and they asked us if we could help them out. And as was mentioned earlier, we were able to configure Mavro on our own and take on extra work and have our people do the scanning for customer service. So hopefully I've answered the question.
I think so. Mark, actually, this next one is for you. Our mail has a wide variety of documents, including full pages, receipts, and even sticky notes. What sizes of paper can the OPEX scanners handle, and can the various documents be intermixed?
Well, our scanners can handle a piece of paper as small as a business card, and then as large, actually, as legal, or in fact, 12.5 inches by 25 inches. And they can be intermixed paper weights, sizes, sticky notes if they're on there. That's fine. Some people want them to go through with the paper. Some put them on a separate piece or the back, but we can process them. It really isn't a problem at all.
I should emphasize, it doesn't matter the order that you're dropping the paper in. The software will take care of the rest. So you basically drop it in the order in which you're taking it out of the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mike, this question is for you. We have non-payment correspondence that requires manually input of information to process. How can we incorporate in Mavro for automation?
That's a great question, and that's something that we've solved at a couple different locations. What we have done, not knowing the specifics of what you're looking for, what we have done, I can talk to, and so when as Frank said, you drop the information or drop the pages out of the envelope and scan them. Upon import, Mavro will be able to recognize that this is a piece of correspondence. We don't know what the correspondence is about at that point, but we just know it's not part of the payment, or if it's not in a payment workflow, we just know that it's a piece of paper we have to do something with. So as part of that process, we're going to evaluate that piece of paper, and there's a couple things we can do. If it's machine printed, we can look for specific keywords on that piece of paper, and based upon a read result, know something that we need to do about it. If it's not machine printed, it's a handwritten note or a handwritten form, then we may have to have an operator do some of that same things from from the digital image. But once we identify what the classification is, then we can send it to a job where that type of data entry can be performed. So we don't want to anticipate that adding specific information to the form is required on every piece of correspondence. We want to classify it first and then move it to the next stage. Upon entering the data for that type of classification, we can then append that to the image. We can, if it's a reject or some sort of legal term that you want to return something back to the customer, we can take data that we captured from that transaction, data that was entered by the operator on that transaction, and actually create a letter. And that letter can be customized with logos and specifics about what you received. And we can produce that and pass it down in a print stream for it to be returned back to your end user. So there's lots of different things that we can do once we've been able to identify it as a piece of correspondence, and then classify further down what kind of correspondence and what are the business requirements to appropriately respond in an automated fashion. So unfortunately, it's not 100% automated because we are dealing with potential handwriting or very unique scenarios in this case, but we're automating it much more significantly than manually outsorting it, sending it to another department to review, typing up another letter specifically for it. There's lots of ways that we can make that much more efficient today.
Thank you. Mark, this one is for you. Can the opener's settings be adjusted to avoid cutting into documents?
Yes, we have both a side and a top cut that is very granular, very adjustable. There's no machine anywhere that will not cut a content ever, because sometimes people try to stuff 5 pounds in a 4-pound bag, so to speak. But the normal trifold that you put in an envelope, because of our milling cutter on the top, it rarely actually cuts the paper. And the side cut, which is a true cut, is also adjustable. So we really don't run into a significant issue with cutting paper. Frank can probably speak to it as well from his experience.
Yes, I can say that we don't have that issue whatsoever. I mean, every now and then it does happen, and also the equipment, the way we have it set up, sorts out envelopes that are too large that we wouldn't put through the machine for cutting. We also sort out if it has metal in it, so it doesn't go to our cutting machine as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Frank, while I have you, I have a question for you. How do you separate your remittance processing from the AP scanning? Do you have a separate Mavro workflow for the two, or are you scanning everything together?
No, we have, first of all, the mail comes in to different locations. We have a number of different post office boxes. So the mail comes in a segregated fashion for the most part. And for each company and for each business processing type, whether it's checks or sundry payments or customer agreements, we have different jobs that we have set up so that when we start using the scanning equipment, the process flow for that particular type of work is invoked.
Next question, this one for you, Mike. It's actually a three-parter, so I'll ask each part at a time. The first part is Mavro software specifically designed to work with the OPEX scanners, or does it work with other capture devices?
The answer to that question is yes, it is specifically designed to work with all sorts of scanners. We find OPEX to be the optimal scanner to use for a one-touch process, but it doesn't preclude us from using other scanners or other input sources. I mentioned in the one-touch processing slide, email, fax, remote capture, mobile, and all of those different types of devices. And for those specific modules, we can import from there as well. If you do have legacy transports, or if you do have other manufacturer scanners, those are supported as well. But we feel that with the OPEX scanning device, we have the best option for the lowest labor, most efficient process overall.
Okay. The next part of that question is, you mentioned that Mavro is supported in AWS and Azure. So it supports Open Identity as a service and Azure ID. If I'm saying that correctly, sorry if I'm not.
Unfortunately, that's probably not a question that I'll be able to answer here. I'll have to get some additional information on that to follow up with who asked it. I will say this, that Mavro is not a SaaS provider or a reseller of hosted infrastructure. So if you have a relationship with Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, and you want to utilize that infrastructure, we would have you set up those servers so that we would have the ability to install on them. So as far as the specific question as to that installation process, I'll have to get some additional information and follow up afterwards.
And the same might be for the final part of the question, but I'll ask it anyway. If it is set up in the cloud, how does integration with the captured device handle scanner, OPEX, or other drivers?
So there are some specific modules that allow for a remote location that's utilizing the OPEX device or other scanner devices. Those devices can capture locally, and then this module moves the images and data across whatever network is available, encrypted, securely to your cloud location. So we would work with you specifically on the connectivity required, as well as the access and authorization that you would want between where the cloud is going to be, your servers in the cloud, and that local capture activity.
Okay, next question is for Frank. It sounds like your project has met your expectations. However, is there anything you might have done differently based on what you know today?
Clearly, we would have gotten rid of our transports earlier. Also, I think based on what we know today, I probably would have looked to have been more aggressive in some of the things that we've implemented over the last year or so. I would have probably tried to take on more work earlier, but it's been a very successful implementation, and so I don't know if we would have done it differently, yes, but I'm pretty satisfied with the route that we did take.
Okay, and I have one final question here. Mark, does OPEX scanners, do they just process documents in envelopes, or can it also scan stacks of mail?
Yeah, envelope processing is just one of the things. I mean, our scanner is a general purpose scanner with intelligence. It's scanning documents, reading barcodes, classifying the documents, reading micro lines on checks. So the fact that the envelope is the source of a lot of the work that we do, we do file folders, we do medical records, we do form processing, investment processing. Essentially, if there's a piece of paper that you need a picture of, our scanners can do that and do it more efficiently, and your images will be available to you to work sooner in the whole process. So, yeah, we sort of get pigeonholed on occasion as the money scanner or the envelope scanner. The fact of the matter is that it's a very capable general purpose scanning device. Probably in the 30 some odd years that I've been doing this, I think it's the best scanner in the market, and I'm biased, but there you go.
Okay, well, thank you to our speakers today, Mike, Mark, and Frank. I appreciate your time. If you'd like to reach out directly to any of our speakers, here's their contact information. Again, everyone who attended today's session will receive a recording. Thank you and have a great day.